My sister begged me to co-sign her mortgage. I'll pay everything. You're just a backup. I signed the papers. 4 months later, she stopped paying and disappeared. The bank came after me for $200,000. I hired a private investigator, found her living in New York under a fake name, and had her extradited. She's now facing federal fraud charges. I, 34 am, never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to hire a private investigator to track down his own sister. But life has a twisted sense of humor. It started 8 months ago when my sister showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, looking more put together than I'd seen her in years. She had this glow about her, the kind that comes from finally getting your life in order. She told me she'd found the perfect house in Oregon, a 3-bedroom with a backyard and good schools nearby. She'd been saving for years, she said, and she was finally ready to stop throwing money away on rent. The problem was her credit score. She'd had some medical debt from a few years back that tanked her rating, and while she'd paid everything off, the banks were still holding it against her. She just needed someone to co-sign, just a formality really, someone with good credit to make the bank feel secure. She'd handle all the payments, every single one. I'd just be a backup, a name on paper, nothing more. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But she was my sister. We'd grown up in the same cramped apartment with parents who worked 3 jobs between them just to keep us fed. We'd shared everything, protected each other, survived together. When she looked at me with those desperate eyes and promised this was her chance to finally build something stable, I couldn't turn her away. I asked her if she was sure she could handle the payments. She pulled out a folder with her bank statements, pay stubs from her job as a dental hygienist, even a detailed budget showing exactly how she'd managed the mortgage alongside her other expenses. Everything looked solid. She was making decent money, had minimal debt, and the mortgage payment would be less than what she was currently paying in rent. I signed the papers 3 weeks later at a title company in Portland. The house was nice, a modest place in a quiet neighborhood with maple trees lining the street. She walked through it with this wonder in her eyes, touching the walls like she couldn't believe they were hers. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and told me I'd given her a second chance at life. For the first 4 months, everything was fine. I'd check in with her every couple of weeks, and she'd assure me the payments were going through without a hitch. She sent me photos of the house, showed me how she'd painted the living room a warm gray, how she'd planted flowers in the front yard. She seemed happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen since before our parents died. Then the calls stopped. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were both busy, and sometimes weeks would go by without us talking. But when I tried calling her in late March, her phone went straight to voicemail. I figured maybe she'd forgotten to pay her bill or was dealing with some personal issue. I sent texts, left voicemails, even messaged her on social media. Nothing. The first letter from the bank arrived on April 15th. It was addressed to both of us, informing us that the mortgage payment for March had not been received and that we were now in default. My stomach dropped. I called the bank immediately, thinking there had to be some mistake. Maybe the payment had gotten lost in the mail or processed incorrectly. The representative told me no payment had been made since February. My sister had missed 2 months. I drove to the house that same day. It was a 6-hour drive from Seattle, but I didn't care. I had to know what was happening. When I pulled up to the address, my chest tightened. The yard that had been so carefully maintained was now overgrown with weeds. The flowers she'd planted were dead. The curtains were drawn, and there was a pile of mail shoved into the mailbox, overflowing onto the ground. I knocked on the door for 10 minutes. No answer. I walked around the house, peering through windows, but all the furniture was gone. The place was completely empty, like no one had ever lived there at all. I called the police to do a wellness check, thinking maybe something terrible had happened to her. They searched the property and confirmed what I already suspected. She was gone, and she'd taken everything with her. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of foul play. She'd simply left. The bank letters kept coming. By May, they were threatening foreclosure and legal action against me personally. I owed $200,000, the full amount of the mortgage minus the small down payment she'd made. My savings were decent, but nowhere near enough to cover that. I'd worked for 12 years as a software engineer, building my nest egg slowly and carefully, and now it was all about to disappear because I'd trusted my own sister. I tried everything to find her. I called her friends, reached out to distant relatives, even contacted her former employer. No one had heard from her. Her dental office told me she'd quit in early March without notice, saying she had a family emergency. Her landlord at her old apartment said she'd given up the lease months before buying the house, which should have been my first red flag. The bank started garnishing my wages in June. 25% of every paycheck, gone, just like that. I was having trouble making rent on my own apartment, cutting back on everything, eating ramen and peanut butter sandwiches like I was in college again. I felt humiliated, angry, and utterly betrayed. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. His name was Marcus, a former cop who'd gone into private practice after retiring. I found him through a Reddit recommendation, actually, on some legal advice thread where someone had been in a similar situation. He was expensive, but I was desperate. I gave him everything I had, photos of my sister, her social security number, her last known contacts, everything. It took him 3 weeks to find her. She was living in Brooklyn, New York, under a different name. She'd rented a luxury apartment in Park Slope, one of those trendy neighborhoods with organic markets and expensive coffee shops. Marcus sent me surveillance photos. There she was, my sister, walking down the street in designer clothes, carrying shopping bags from boutiques I couldn't afford even when I was making full salary. She looked happy, carefree, like she didn't have a worry in the world. Marcus dug deeper. She'd created an entirely new identity using fraudulent documents. She had a fake driver's license, a fake social security card, even fake employment records. She'd been working as a hostess at an upscale restaurant under this new name, paying rent in cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. She'd planned this, every single step of it, long before she ever asked me to co-sign. The more I learned, the sicker I felt. This wasn't a desperate mistake or a mental breakdown. This was calculated fraud. She'd used me deliberately, knowing exactly what would happen when she disappeared. The house had never been about building a stable life. It had been about getting a $200,000 loan she never intended to pay back, and I was the fool who'd made it possible. I contacted a lawyer immediately. He told me I had grounds for a civil suit, but that getting my money back would be nearly impossible if she'd already spent it. What I could do, however, was press criminal charges. What she'd done wasn't just a breach of trust. It was fraud, identity theft, and potentially even federal crimes since she'd used falsified documents and crossed state lines. We filed a police report in Oregon, providing all the evidence Marcus had gathered. The detective assigned to the case was skeptical at first, but once he saw the documentation, his tone changed. He told me this was more serious than a family dispute. This was organized fraud, the kind that could land someone in federal prison. It took another month for the wheels of justice to start turning. The FBI got involved because of the interstate fraud and identity theft components. They obtained a warrant for her arrest and coordinated with the NYPD to bring her in. They arrested her on a Thursday morning in late July as she was leaving her apartment for work. Marcus sent me a photo of her in handcuffs, looking shocked and terrified, being led into a police car. I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling a mix of satisfaction and profound sadness. She was extradited back to Oregon within a week. The charges were severe: mortgage fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and making false statements to a financial institution. All federal charges, each carrying potential prison time. Her bail was set at $150,000, which she couldn't make, so she sat in jail awaiting trial. I got a call from her public defender 3 days after her arrest. He told me she wanted to speak to me, to explain everything. I told him I had nothing to say to her. He pressed, saying she was remorseful, that she wanted to make things right. I hung up, but curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I agreed to a supervised call from the jail. She was crying before she even started talking. She told me she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd gotten involved with the wrong people, that she'd panicked and run. She claimed she'd intended to pay the mortgage but had gotten in over her head with gambling debts. She begged me to drop the charges, promised she'd find a way to pay me back if I just gave her a chance. I listened to all of it without saying a word. When she finally stopped talking, I asked her one question. Had she planned this from the beginning? There was a long silence. Then she admitted that yes, she'd known she couldn't afford the house, that she'd needed the money for debts I didn't know about, that she'd planned to disappear once the loan came through. She'd thought that by moving across the country and changing her identity, she could just vanish, and eventually, the bank would foreclose, and that would be the end of it. She hadn't thought they'd come after me so aggressively. She hadn't thought I'd have the resources to find her. I told her I'd see her in court and hung up. The preliminary hearings happened over the next few months. The prosecution had an airtight case: bank records, surveillance footage, testimony from Marcus, the fake identity documents, everything. Her public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested in being lenient. They wanted to make an example of her, to show that this kind of fraud wouldn't be tolerated. The bank, meanwhile, worked out an agreement with me. Because I'd cooperated fully with the investigation and had been an obvious victim of fraud, they agreed to freeze the foreclosure proceedings and work out a settlement. I'd still be on the hook for some of the money, but they'd significantly reduce the amount and give me a manageable payment plan. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than losing everything. Update 1. The trial started in October. I attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching my sister try to defend the indefensible. Her lawyer argued that she'd been suffering from mental health issues, that she hadn't been in her right mind when she committed the fraud. The prosecution tore that argument apart, showing evidence of her careful planning, her creation of false documents, her methodical approach to disappearing. On the fourth day of the trial, the prosecution called me to testify. I walked up to the stand and swore to tell the truth, then answered questions about our relationship, about the day she'd asked me to co-sign, about my attempts to find her after she disappeared. I kept my voice steady and my emotions in check, but inside, I was falling apart. The defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to paint me as vindictive, suggesting that I was exaggerating her culpability because I was angry about the money. I simply repeated the facts. She'd lied to me, defrauded me, and vanished with $200,000 of debt in my name. There was nothing vindictive about seeking justice. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The judge was harsh, noting that my sister had shown no genuine remorse and had only expressed regret after being caught. She was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 if she demonstrated good behavior. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to both the bank and to me, though the judge acknowledged that collecting that money would likely be difficult. I watched her face as the sentence was read. She looked small and broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd hugged me in that empty house 8 months ago. For a moment, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the meals I'd skipped to save money, and the sympathy evaporated. Update 2. It's been 3 months since the sentencing. My life has slowly started to return to normal, though normal feels different now. The bank and I finalized our settlement. I'm paying $800 a month for the next 5 years, which is manageable with my salary. My credit took a hit, but it's recovering. I've started rebuilding my savings, one paycheck at a time. I haven't spoken to my sister since that phone call from jail. She's written me a few letters from prison, but I've returned them all unopened. Some family members have reached out, asking me to forgive her, telling me that she's still my sister and that family should stick together. I've politely told them that she stopped being my sister the moment she decided to destroy my life for her own gain. The hardest part has been accepting that the person I trusted most in the world was capable of something so cruel. I keep replaying our childhood, looking for signs I missed, moments that might have predicted this betrayal. But there's nothing. She was just my sister, and I loved her, and she used that love as a weapon. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and betrayal. She's helped me understand that what my sister did wasn't my fault, that trust isn't weakness, and that sometimes people we love are capable of terrible things. It's slow progress, but it's progress. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her, but I'm learning to let go of the rage that's been consuming me. She'll serve her time, and I'll move on with my life. Maybe one day, years from now, we'll have some kind of reconciliation. But that day isn't today, and it won't be tomorrow. For now, I'm focused on rebuilding what she tried to destroy: my financial security, my ability to trust, and my sense of self-worth. She took a lot from me, but she didn't take everything. I'm still here, still standing, and that has to count for something. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.